if I fix a machine and it runs fine here, and then a guy takes it out on a job and he's having problems with it, I'll charge him to go out to his job site. And sometimes going out and teaching him how to sand, even though he's been sanding for 15 years, the pace at which you walk, there's guys are messing around with their cord and things like that, and that will cause waves too. Or they're cutting, the machine from the left to the right, and things like that. It's like, but I've been doing it this way for 20 years. Yeah, well, you've been doing it wrong for 20 years.
All right, welcome to All Things Wood Floor, brought to you by Wood Floor Business. Today, our guest, Tom Wimberly of TNT Machine Repair in Marcellus, Illinois. He's going to talk about hardwood floor burnout, his semi-retirement, and his mastery of machine repairs. Tom's journey goes from floor sanding to keeping your gear alive. Highlighting some of what we're going to talk about today, 5 habits of how to save your machines, keep your crews running, and just the legacy he shares in his wisdom of how to keep his equipment clean and his crews running swiftly. Tom is the guy that you call when your big machine starts to sound wrong and you just don't know why. So listen, he's got an article coming up in the December-January issue of Wood Floor Business Magazine. This podcast is all about machines, so let's get to it. Tom, how you doing, man?
Doing great. How you doing?
We just
today?
caught up. I know you probably just finished wrapping it up. Tom Wimberly, TNT Machine Repair. Is it Marcellus, Illinois? I'm not sure. Is it Marseille, Illinois?
Marseilles.
Oh, there we go. That's so much better. Hey, so it's funny. We've talked a little bit before, but you're like me tonight. I got stuck in the warehouse repairing tools and equipment. I'm a small engines mechanic, an okay mechanic, and a tool repair guy, which I've done forever. And we opened up our new shop, and a couple of people brought things in, and now it's like 24/7 with the machines coming in. How did you get suckered into all this? Because you're a floor guy to start off with.
Yeah, I've been a floor guy for 40 years. My grandfather did hardwood and my uncle, so I grew up in it. I started working on my own equipment because I had taken my equipment in to get it repaired, and they didn't do a good job. So I ended up just start working on it myself and figuring it out. I've always been pretty mechanical. And then, I don't know, about 5 years ago, American Sanders asked me if I would be willing to get trained and do the warranty work here in the Chicagoland area, because they really only had one other shop that was, certified. And they were backlogged, for three months or so. Chicago's a giant market for hardwood flooring, and with only one, qualified repair technician. There was a couple other guys doing it here and there. There was one guy that was real good, Eddie. He moved down to St. Louis, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago or whatever it's been. And so that took it, that was mainly who everybody I knew used. So I got certified, and I've been doing it since. And then,
did you do what they send you over to American Standard to get certified, or did you go somewhere?
I went to North Carolina and spent a couple days there and got certified to work on the equipment. A lot of it I already knew, but it was cool to see the history of it and the plant and where they manufacture everything and stuff. It was really cool. It's a nice little area in the mountains in North Carolina there.
When you think about it, Chicago's huge. Well, I'm here in Boston.
A couple million people, yeah.
Yeah, people talk about Boston. Boston's actually pretty tiny, but I can tell you 3 mechanics within an hour. That's it, and they're so busy. Yeah. You couldn't get your stuff through to them anyway. Same thing. American Standard came in here and said, "Well, hey, what do you think?" I said, "Well, I'd like to get somebody up and running. Could you train them?" They said, "Sure. Send them out. We'll help them out." But I mean, because they offer so many different things. So, but you have this entire story. I know I've read some of your stuff in Wood Floor Business Magazine. You were like, you got floor guy, you got some burnout, you got semi-retired, you're a machine repair guy, but you're not just a hardwood floor tool repair guy. You're a mechanic too, right?
Yeah, I ran an automotive shop also for a lot of years while I ran my flooring business. So it was a fabrication shop working on off-road vehicles, mainly just doing lift kits and roll bars and roll cages and re-gearing the axles, rebuilding, manual transmissions and motor work. I mean, you name it, we did it all. And I was the main mechanic.
Was this stuff that you think when you were younger, did you do this in school? Like I took every shop class. For every lit class I took a shop class. I loved them.
Well, I remember my first car, when you're 16 and back in the 80s, you bought a beater for a few $100. It wasn't running right. So one summer day while my parents were at work, I pulled the carburetor off and sat at the kitchen table and rebuilt the carburetor. Well, they came home and they threw a fit because the whole house smelled like gasoline. But I was always not afraid to work on anything. My dad, we were poor growing up, so we did all the repairs on on the house or the vehicles ourselves. And back then, you couldn't Google anything, or sometimes you took stuff apart and pieces went flying, and then you had to figure out what that was and try to find it or repair it or rebuild it. Or
Flying pieces.
I broke a lot of things trying to figure out how to fix them, and it cost me more money, but that's how you learn sometimes.
And that's what. Hey, what year did you graduate? What's your class?
I didn't quite make it, but I would have been class of '88.
Oh, okay. I'm 82, so you're still young.
Yeah, yeah.
Is
Yeah,
that
I just turned 56, and I'm already out of sanding completely. About 4 months ago, I gave up on the sanding. The repair business was supposed to be just a little side hustle, make a little bit extra money, but because of the demand here in Chicago for a good mechanic, I got approached by Lagler and Bona, and I'm certified with them also now. So I couldn't keep up running the flooring business and trying to keep up on the equipment. As it sits right now, tonight, I got 47 pieces of equipment in here that, everybody needs immediately. And that's what working on.
Did you clean your shop up? I saw a little video of it just for me, or is it always like that? It looks really good. Usually shops look not that neat.
I'm pretty organized.
Good.
My work trailer was everything in its place, everything, because it saves time. To me, chaos. I see these guys work trucks and, they got everything piled on top of it, and they wonder why their equipment's in such bad shape because their edges are bouncing around. They got stain and poly on every piece of equipment they own because they don't have an organized vehicle. My uncle was like that. My grandfather, not so much, but my uncle was real anal about it and everything in its place. And when you go to the truck or the trailer, I worked out of a trailer since '93. When you go to the trailer and you have it and you know where it's at, it saves a lot of time instead of guys digging through. They think they have it. They spend a half hour digging through their truck and then go buy it. And then the next day they find the one that they were looking for. That stuff would drive me nuts.
How did you did flooring install, sand and finish, or just sand and finish?
Yep.
Hey,
No,
tell me a little bit about that, because where was that, like, after when how old were you when you started doing that part of it?
so I left home at 15. I dropped out of high school my freshman year, and I moved out of my house, my parents' house. And my uncle did hardwood and my grandfather did hardwood. But my first job doing hardwood was actually for their competition in town because I was having, a little bit of outs with the family. I went to the competition and said, I want to learn how to do this. And they're like, well, haven't you worked with your uncle and your grandfather before? I'm like, no, because they knew each other. It's like, no, I haven't done this at all. This is, fresh out of the gate. And he set me up in a closet with a Wagler Randmeister edger and told me what to do, and comes in there and he's like, quit screwing around. You know what you're doing. Get to work. And honestly, that was the first time I had ever ran an edger. And I told him that. And he's like, nobody picks it up and learns that quick. Quit pulling my leg. Obviously, you've worked with your family, and that's pretty much how it started. And I worked for a while I was 15, again when I was 16 for some companies. And then I ended up on the East Coast in Norfolk, Virginia. And I just, back then in the '80s, you could grab a phone book, open it up, and any ad in, anybody that was advertising hardwood floors in the, yellow pages, if you told them, I can do any job start to finish, I know how to install and sand, they'd hire you over the phone. It wasn't as popular as a trade, and hardwood wasn't as popular back then. So it was really easy to get a job immediately. And I took advantage of that because I was young and I was kind of a screw up. And I traveled up and down the East Coast and worked for a bunch of different companies. I worked up in DC and we did jobs in Maryland. And I was living in Fairfax County for a while and did work up in Richmond, Virginia. And I got to learn something everywhere I went. And then my uncle, he left Chicago and he went to California and he did floors out there for a few years. And then we ended up in Virginia together. And that's where we kind of blended what he learned in California and what I learned around in Virginia. And we both learned that my grandfather was pretty much a hack. He was the cheap guy. You wanted it done cheap, that was my grandfather. He did good work, but not the greatest. But he was the cheap guy. And that was one thing I never wanted to be known as, was the cheap guy. I wanted to be known as the good guy, the guy that knows what he's doing, not the inexpensive guy. And he started a business, and I worked for him in Virginia for a few years, and then come around 93 when the Gulf War hit. Norfolk is a very military-based place, and the economy just froze there. It just nothing was going on. And then we ended up coming back into Illinois because bigger metropolitan area it can handle. There's no one thing driving the economy. And we came up here, and it was going to be temporarily, and and here we are. I'm still here in Illinois. I hate this state personally, but it's where the money's at.
A lot of floor people come from that area. It's absolutely amazing. Every time I ask somebody, they'll say they're from Boston, but I used to be in, Michigan. I used to be in Peoria, Illinois. You never know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay. So you did, how long do you think you did just to sand and finish? Install too, by the way? Did you install? Okay. How long did you do that?
I've been doing that for 40 years.
Okay. But then when you make the shift and you said, you know what, I'm just going to have to fix machines because I'm buried with these things.
4 months ago, I was always behind. I hate, having people's equipment for a long period of time. So I was always running behind. I had a good crew. I had, like, during the COVID years, I had, 3-4 crews. And then right coming out of COVID, I told my guys, I picked 2 guys and said, we're going to work less. I'm going to pay you more. And they said, that sounds good. And then we stopped working weekends and stopped doing the 7 days a week thing, and really changed the way I was doing my business to take some of the stress out so I would have time to work on the equipment more. And we did that up until one of my guys, about 4 months ago, one of my guys said he was leaving Illinois because it's such a crappy state, expensive to live in. And I didn't feel like hiring or training or doing that anymore. It was my exit. I just said, all right, I'm out too then.
Well, that works. With your machines and equipment, was your first, knowing you're mechanical, your first repairs must have been way back when you were doing floors. You didn't just yeah, right. And then, so give me that. What was the first thing you think you ever repaired? It was probably a clock or something, but I mean, what's the first floor machine you ever repaired?
The first floor machine were the edgers, just setting them up, changing the pads and doing brushes on them and that. And I never, really thought twice about it. To me, that wasn't a repair. That was just basic maintenance, or if, something stopped running, we'd figure out why and how and fix it. What really got me doing it more on my own was when my uncle and I decided to go out on my own and do my own business. I bought a machine used from my uncle. I took it to Clark at the time and down in Chicago, and told him, I got 3 months worth of work, scheduled. This is going to be my main machine. I need it, top notch 100%. And they worked on it. And then I went to go do my first job at that time. And this is, 1990, 93 or so. No, probably 95. And I go out to my first job with this machine, and they charged me like $2,500 to do a bunch of repairs on it. New drum, new wheels, new bearings, all that kind of stuff. And I go out to do my first job, and I started up and I put the drum down on the floor, and it just slows down and stopped. And I'm like, holy cow, so I call them up and said, this thing ain't running. I brought it back to them, and they told me the motor's no good. I'm like, why would I put $2,500 into the chassis of a machine that the motor's no good? Wouldn't you test the motor first? Yeah. So at that point, they wanted another $2,500 for the motor to rebuild or something. And I'm like, well, I'm beyond the cost of a brand new machine. I could have just bought a brand new machine. I'm just starting out, and I'm trying to make do with what I had. So that was the last time I ever paid anybody to work on any sanding equipment. I just had a bad experience and wasted time and money and said that was it. Then over the years, I worked with a lot of guys that we all worked for different companies when we were younger, and they all started their own businesses. And then they would bring me their stuff, and I would work on it, for them. Just handful group of guys that I knew real well. I always worked on their equipment too.
Isn't it funny? There's so many things that can go wrong with, like when someone brings their car to a mechanic and they say, is there gas in it? And you want to sock them in the head, but they're right. It could be a broken gauge. One of the biggest things I see when I'm repairing tools is, like you just said, what if the machine's running or it's dogging at half power? And I'll just say, could I see your cord? I know it's not the cord. And you're going to find out, again, like you said, test it. What if you got one lead's been cut because you ran over it? Now you're running 110 to a 230 sander, and you wonder why it's dogging it. And like I was the same as you. I'm looking at this going, does anybody know how to repair their own stuff? We had to in the 80s. There were no mechanics. Right. We had to know how to fix our stuff. We couldn't afford a second machine.
And there was no Google.
We're gonna get into that because that is that's
No YouTube.
that I just moved from that to AI. Oh my goodness! But you'd mentioned once, I think, in a magazine article, and I'm with you. I started my business, and my accountant said my partner wanted to get a really cool van, and my accountant said, "Get a sander. The sander will make you thousands a day, but that van's going to cost you money every month. Get the
Fan
sander."
appreciates.
Right, because you had said
Yeah.
machines aren't making any money. If they're in my shop, they're making money on the job, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's it?
I always get into conversations with guys too, is, they have their sander they've had for 25 years and it looks like it's, been drugged behind their truck to the job, is caked with dust but they, oh, it runs perfect, or they keep putting money into it. I was a strong believer of putting money aside and buying new equipment every, 10 years or so, just for the appearance of the equipment, or, for what I was charging and the homes I was working in. I would be embarrassed to pull in and unload some of the equipment I work on daily here, you know. But
It's
guys, a lot of them, they don't take care of their stuff. Just a simple blowing out of the equipment would save a lot of their repair problems. That's probably 90% of the repairs I do is just from over caking with dust and getting jammed in everything. And then they try to, use the mechanism to release the paper, and the upper roller's caked with dust, and then they bend stuff and break stuff.
We're gonna have fun. I'm gonna take you shortly through each machine because they all tell their own story. But do you think, knowing you, I know a lot of guys, and it's like Howard Brickman, he's in flooring, and Lonnie Parrish was our tool mechanic guy, and he worked for him. There's a difference because he had worked several years in the field using the equipment. And
Right,
there's a difference
right.
between someone you drop off and you say, "Here's my floor tools. Can you fix them?" and someone that's actually run them, right?
Oh, big time. The thing that I noticed for years is, most of the time a company sets up somebody and trains them to work on equipment, it's through a distributorship, and that's kind of their deal, is they
Yes.
don't really allow, just anybody to get trained and work on equipment. They usually go through the dealerships. Well, the dealerships usually take the guy that's warehouse hand, or the delivery guy, or the forklift driver, or whatever, send them to the class for a couple days, and then now they're working on your sander. It's kind of, they know how to change parts and that, but a lot of them have never sanded a floor before. And that's where I know, like with me, 40 years of sanding floors, I know how this equipment's supposed to run, how it's supposed to sound when you start it up. I mean, there's a lot of things that, that type of experience you can't train somebody.
With your average person that brings in tools, all of them, add them all up. What do you think the most common mistake is that most of them do make with just keeping the stuff maintained?
Just blowing it out,
Blow it up.
really.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. And then, checking your plug-ins every couple years, to just take it apart, make sure the screws are tight, make sure the plug itself isn't melted on the inside. It just takes a couple minutes to do that. Do it once a year, just like changing the battery in your, you know, smoke detector in your house. You check your cords, check your ends. I mean, that's a lot of it. I get a lot of people that say, "Oh, it doesn't work." I get here, and first thing I do is I start looking from where the power enters the machine, and that's the first thing. And a lot of times it's that plug. It's like, that's why it ain't running. It's just the plug, and it's a quick, easy fix for me. But they're down on the job and have problems when it could have been avoided.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes I see, and you could tell me about this, is, okay, blowing the machine out is one thing, but I know with a lot of different pieces of gear, especially the big machine, and I made this mistake myself, is lubricating it, spraying it, keeping it clean.
Yeah,
Stuff runs great, and you don't realize that fine wood dust starts to stick to it the minute you get it going, and then it turns into heat and glue and tar, and then everything sticks. So it's not just keeping things clean. I've even had somebody say, "Don't blow everything into your upper roller assembly because you can be
right.
packing it in there. Take it out of the machine when you clean it."
Well, what I recommend too is, if you're going to blow out your machine, just use like a handheld small leaf blower, or
Sure.
now Milwaukee, Makita, DeWalt, they all make a little handheld blower. But you don't want to be blowing it with 150 psi from your air compressor,
Yeah.
because you're going to blow that dust into the seals of the bearings and into other areas where it shouldn't be going. You just want to get the bulk of the dust out of there. When I sanded, I always ran a floor crafter, and the floor crafter always had issues of picking the dust up if the bag was too full, if you didn't pay attention, and that upper roller would cake with dust real easily. So what I started doing for all the years that I sanded is I would do my rough cut, and then before I would start my fine paper, I would turn on the machine in the house with the bag on it and the machine running with no paper on the machine, and then take my little handheld blower and blow into the upper roller area so the dust gets airborne and it gets sucked up into the bag of the machine. You're not making a mess in the house, and then you're getting all that heavy clumpy dust from when you're doing your rough cut out of the machine. So now when I run my fine paper, the machine will track better and run better, and overall never have any issues. My floor crafter, it ran probably, I don't know, probably 10 years before I even changed my upper roller, just because I always kept it clean. I didn't do, if you're doing these refinishes where you're using 16 grit and there's the old gummy varnish finishes or glues or carpet, glue backings, things like that, you need to clean your machine directly after, sanding that and get it all out of there, because that's, going to build up and then causes other issues. I got to the point where I wouldn't even do those types of jobs because my equipment's too nice. I kept an old split drum, around just for doing that type of work, because I didn't want to run, my upper roller assembly through all that gooey, dust that, or if you're doing a pine job, it's not the best thing for, these modern belt sanding machines. You're better off with an old split drum for your first couple cuts. But a lot of guys, can't have both, but I always kept an old one around.
Hey, how about in your shop? Because give me some advice. When you bring in all these machines and your shop looks great, is it a different practice? Do you like take them off property and blow these things out, or do you have a little? I'll tell you, what we do now, because I made the mistake the other day. A guy brought in a machine, he needed it repaired. I blew it off real quick, and my warehouse guy looked like he was going to kill me because the whole building. What we usually do is I put them out back now, and I get a nice soft paintbrush, and we get a leaf blower, and I put these giant fans and we aim them into the woods. And as he nails it with the leaf blower, which it's not as compact as an air gun, I'll go over it with a nice soft China bristle brush and get everything out of there and not in the building. How do you get everything, like when you're in your shop, from getting all dusted up?
So because I'm out of the Chicago area by about an hour, I do one day a week. I do pickup and drop off at all the distributors, in Chicago area, or a lot of them, not all, but most of them. So I'm in their parking lot before that even goes in my trailer, and I'm blowing them out because I don't want that dust in my trailer. I don't want it in my van. I mean, like I said, it's amazing the amount of dust that I get out of some of these machines, and that's all that's really wrong with them, is just they're packed full of dust. When I get back to the shop, as I unload them out of the trailer, I take them. I live out in the woods, so I take them. I have area that I take them, and got concrete, you clean them out and blow them up before they even come in the building, because that's all that dust. And I still get a lot of dust in the shop. In the shop, I usually use a vacuum before blowing because I don't want it all airborne. It'll choke you. But I got pictures on my Facebook where I had a Galaxy come in, and he's like, "Oh, it just shuts off. It runs and then shuts off." And I got two leaf blowers, and probably for 10 minutes just blowing dust out of this machine. I've never seen so much dust inside a motor before. Because Galaxy motors are not a sealed motor, so that dust just got inside, got on the windings. The windings couldn't cool properly with the fan inside of it, and they would just heat up and it would shut off. It was basically saving itself from burning up.
Wow.
And really, that's all I did. I blew it out, I ran it, tested it, and it didn't shut off anymore. So,
You know what? I'm gonna. There's some habits that you talked about because I really liked them, and you'll remember these. You said there's kind of 5 habits to saving your gear: blow it out, listen up, warm it up, look for sparks, and empty your vacuum. So we talked about blowing stuff out, but you kind of mentioned in some of the stuff that you wrote about listening, and you're right. You can hear a big machine when it doesn't quite sound right. Each machine will give you a little something that right off the bat, this is not working. Squealing bearings, this sort of. What are you hearing in machines that would tell you this is not going well?
Yeah, in the shop, I should be using hearing protection. Nowadays, a lot of guys, I can't blame the operators like we used to, because, we didn't use that stuff, years ago. But now I can understand why they don't hear that, why they're running it, because, you should have ear protection on. But in here, as soon as I turn it on, you can hear if a bearing's bad somewhere. You can hear the high pitched squealing noise, and things like that. Sometimes it's just belts slipping too. Usually I do a visual inspection of that first, but there's times where the belts are glazed up and they're slipping.
Yes.
You get used to the way a Hummel sounds, you get used to the way a Floorcrafter sounds or a Galaxy. They all have their own high pitch, hum noise that they make that sounds normal. Something out of the normal, you shut it off and okay, now you try figuring out what it is. Sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's not.
This episode is brought to you by Odie's Oil. Developed by a wood flooring pro, no finish is more safe, durable, beautifying, and versatile, with lower cost and higher profit margin. Experience the pinnacle of finish with free on-site demos and training. Learn more at odiesoil.com. That's ODIES oil.com.
There are things we hear right in the industry that even guys nailing. I know when a gun is empty. And
Oh, yeah.
You and me would look at each other and we'd look at the kid in the other room and wait, like, hey, your gun was empty like 5 feet ago.
Yeah.
Could you stop? How do you train guys like that you're working with? Like, listen, you listen for what's happening with these machines.
Well, that was my thing is I was not an easy guy to work for because I would drill that into the guys right off the bat. It's like if the edger doesn't sound right or the vacuum doesn't sound right, shut it off, come find me and tell me or call me if don't just keep running it and think it's going to solve itself. Like you said with the nailers, being empty, I'll be in another part of the house and you can hear a guy, like you said, he's
the
5
last
rows.
nail pop.
Yeah. And then you hear boom, 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 and he just keeps going, But I train my guys to pay attention. It's really hard to do, but I would drill it into them. And it's also just like while they're walking through a customer's house to just be aware of everything around you. You got a broom in your hand, you don't turn corners and hit windowsills or, door casings and stuff. So it's really, I would not have wanted to work for myself 25 years ago because I was just up everybody's ass all the time. But the type of work we were doing and the customers we were doing, you had to be on your ball all the time. You couldn't be, damaging things and stuff. Cause I had crews where customers would call me and say, oh, the floors look great, but, and it was always those buts, there's stain on the front porch or there's stain in the driveway or finish in the driveway, but the floors look great. And they did a great job in the house, but they were careless and reckless in other parts, of the job. There's a lot to it,
You talked about that third part about warming up, which this is important. People, I think sometimes I get guys come in and they'll have a $7,000 sander and they go, oh, there's something wrong. You might as well check it out. And I'll say, it was 70 yesterday. They go, yeah. And I go, it got down to 32 last night. And I'm looking at your machine. You say it's humming. Was it in the van all night? And they've got the belts cranked like piano wire tight. And I go, have you tried running this machine? So warming up equipment is important. Like Chicago, I swear to God, is no different than Boston or New Hampshire. We get cold,
right.
We get humidity, everything. Warm up machines, right?
Yeah. What we would do is we'd bring the machines in and set them on heat registers or, near, any type of heat source while we're bringing everything in. And, because when you first bring them in, they're ice cold. They hit the warm air of the house and then all of a sudden condensation starts occurring. Sometimes you'll see, depending on how cold it is, I brought edgers in and they just turn completely white and frost up the handles, the whole machine, the armature, everything's covered in frost. Just from the temperature change from being outside all night in a truck to going into a warm house, and you got to wait for that stuff to thaw out and dry off. You don't want to be starting the machine when the, contacts are wet with moisture of that much moisture, and and the bearings, they're all sealed lubricant. Well, if the lubricant's super thick and minus 20 degrees from being out all night, that lubricant ain't going to warm up that quick. You're going to do damage to the bearing. And, over the course of a winter, if you're doing that, 3 times a month to every house you're going in and out of, or 4 times a month, depends on how many jobs you're doing, it can do a lot of damage in a short period of time. And it's just not waiting to let that equipment warm up. Some guys think, well, I started it and I let it run for 10 minutes. Well, that's not warming it up. That's putting it through excess stress that it didn't need to go through.
What do you think? Get it there the night before is a good idea, right? Or the day before, or the Friday before.
Ideally, if you're, like if we were doing an install, I bring my compressor in and warm that up even, but in the guns even, because even the O-rings and the guns is the same thing.
Yeah.
But as we're starting to get done with the install, we'll bring our sanding equipment in a couple days early once we got a room done and let it just sit there and warm up for a couple days. That's ideal, to do it that way. But sometimes you can't, not every situation allows that.
Do you think there's any particular machines that are just more susceptible to being cold that absolutely you should be warming them up?
Seem like the edgers to me, they're just like a ice cube when you bring them in.
Well, they get that solid block at the bottom that's just full of heavy grease, and that doesn't help, and
Yeah,
that's gonna put stress on the
yeah,
armature. I think the big machine, because the belts get cold, they're already fairly tight to begin with, and they kinda
right,
stay in that oval where they don't wanna loop over when you first start them, and I think that's another thing that guys kinda leave them on there a little too cold. You know
yeah.
what? We didn't even been thinking about nail guns.
Oh,
Or you know what? Think about this, the mallet. I've done floor inspections where they go, "Look at the problem with this floor." I go, "You know that there's a dent on every cleat or staple? Were these hammers in your van all night?" "Yes." Especially
oh,
when
yeah,
they used to use the Lixie mallet heads when they were using, like, Boston
right,
guns. Like,
yeah.
warm your stuff up. Did you have a routine? Like, do you how about when somebody brings you in a machine and they go, "Hey, can you fix this?" And it's you can't just start if it comes into your shop frozen cold. You must have to tell them, "Go away. Go bye-bye."
Yeah, I try not to fix anything while people are waiting just because you never know what's gonna happen. It could be a quick fix or it turn into 2, 3 hours and you got a guy watching you for 2 or 3 hours. I rather just have people drop it off, and like I said, like, right now, I got 47 pieces of equipment in the shop. If somebody shows up at the door to drop off a piece of equipment, they're number 48, you know? If it you know, what I try to do, what I'm disciplined about is when a piece of equipment comes into the shop, within the first day or first few hours, I go through it and I figure out what's wrong with it, and then I mark it. I use a color code system. I mark it that, okay, this machine's been looked at. I got another color code for the parts that have been ordered or if the parts are in stock. And then, I make sure at least I know when I have the time to work on that equipment that I have the parts are in inventory, in stock, or they're on order and they're on their way. And then when the special parts show up, I mark it again with another color to let me know the machine parts are in. Now it's just waiting for me to have the time to, finish the machine. And then when it's done, it gets a green tag and then goes, back to the customer. But that's, when I first started doing this, you'd have a piece of equipment for 3, 4 days, and then you finally get into it and you realize, oh shit, I got to order something, and now it's going to be another 3 or 4 days for that customer. So I try to look at everything immediately, at least diagnose it, and figure out, what it's going to take and what parts I have or need to get it fixed quickly for the customer.
There's some really you mentioned earlier, Tom, there's these online different companies like American Sander. We got Rudy and Joe over at US Sander. They put videos out, which is great. YouTube has been amazing for me as a mechanic for anything from repairing a furnace to a bicycle. But I just started using AI. I repaired something the other day. I put the phone right on my hip and I just kept talking to it. It knew a Hummel inside out and backward. It also knew a Cobra 2, and I'm like, "I can't believe my phone is in my pocket. I don't even have to go to the computer." And I was asking it stuff, and I said, "Don't forget the screw at the bottom. That's the tension adjustment." And I'm like, it's
That's
become
crazy.
sick. I love it.
That is crazy.
You were saying your step 4 of what your article that was in Wood Floor Business, I love it. You said, sparks equals stops. Are you the one that said to me that somebody told you they had sparklies? Somebody once said to me, "I got sparklies." I go, "What are sparklies?"
Yeah, I've started stuff up and just seen, like, how could somebody not have seen that, or smelled it?
I had a
But
guy said he said, he was throwing tracers. I go, "I don't know
yeah, tracers,
I don't know
yeah.
what you're talking about." He had ate through all the bearings in his Galaxy so far from over tracking that it was heating it up, digging through the casing, taking each little bearing, it was red hot, and throwing them out of his machine. And I think I told you about it, like, "Did anybody wanna
Just keep
stop?"
running.
Yeah, "Keep running.
Just keep
I'll be
going.
done in 5 minutes."
I only got 300 feet to go.
What kind of damage have you seen on machines? Because this is I told you, I have a little museum of every really
Yeah.
ridiculous part. I keep it to show people, see what happened to this machine.
I did that for a while. I mean, like I said, I've only been doing this for, like 5 years. I was doing that for a little while, and then I didn't have enough room to store all the
Right.
parts that are just like, holy cow. I had an edger in here, and there was blue tape on the side of the edger, which, first thing I do too is take all the blue tape off of people's equipment. That's just a pet peeve. I hate tape on equipment.
Yep.
So as I'm taking the tape off, I pull the tape off the side. I'm thinking, why they got tape there? It doesn't rub on the cabinets or, it just was an odd place to have the tape. the side of the edger had a hole in it. So they were sanding something like concrete or something that was so abrasive that it sandblasted through the side of the aluminum housing. And then their way to fix that was just put tape over it. It needed a whole new bell housing, the lower half gear unit holder.
Tape.
I got a Taurus in here right now that the belt was tracking so long on the inside of the machine that it cut the whole head out. The whole machine, the
we're
whole
going to talk
front half of the
about
machine,
those.
it's completely cut through.
Oh, yeah. Is that Taurus K&T?
Yeah.
My whole career was KT. I love that machine. It's a great machine. We're going to talk about some really good machines. When you're doing this, simple things like, say, belt tension. You can have belt tension on a belt sander and the actual sanding abrasive, but there's also the belt tension on the actual fan belt and also the motor belt driving this. Some people don't even set that stuff. How do you explain this to these people to get simple things like that taken care of?
Yeah. So the one I had this morning was a Hummel. And instead of the eye bolt that you use to adjust the tension of the belts, by raising the motor, somebody put a giant bolt there with a head, and I think they were using an impact on it. I don't know. So they had the tension on the belt so bad that the new belt was like an inch smaller than the belt that was on there, and they were the same exact belt. So they actually had stretched that belt over an inch when just laying them out on top of each other. And then the fan belt was putting so much pressure on the fan assembly that it blew the bearings out because I'm finding on more and more of these Hummels, even if you use the factory belt, it's too small. A lot of guys don't run the tensioner because the belt's that tight. So I've been using the super Hummel belts on the Hummel. It's a little bit bigger, gives you the opportunity to actually adjust it and use the tensioner because these guys over tighten all this stuff, and they wonder why their bearings don't last. If you're putting that much tension on the belts, it's putting tensions on the drum bearings on the bottom and the motor bearings on the top that are not meant to be that tight. What I do is you can look for vibration, in the belt, and when it's blurry, I use a flashlight and I cast a shadow and I watch the shadow. When the shadow's crisp and clean, then the belt is running smooth. You don't want the belt, shaking at all. Kind of a trick I learned and, use a lot.
That, you mentioned the eye bolt, right? If anybody's ever looked at a Hummel or any big machine, there's usually the motor sets on the chassis. It's snugged in with the, bolts in the back or some type of axle. And then once you set the belts on, because you need some slop there to get them on, you need to dial that and screw it down so it lifts the motor, and there's your motor tension. These guys tend to crank the living crap out of it. But what happens is, and I learned this myself, when you're watching the belts go around, and I used to play guitar, they go, watch, there's a thin layer of white threading that goes through automotive belts. They go, watch it. When it starts to super vibrate, you keep turning until it's nice and clean and crisp and flat, and keep going until it starts to vibrate, like you said, get blurry again, then back it off. It should be as clean and smooth as possible. Don't just crank the living tar out of your belts.
That's where a lot of the chatter in the floor comes from, is the belts being either too tight or too loose.
When you're working with the belts like that, what was I going to ask you? There's something about one, right? Give me wave and chatter, okay? Because we're about to jump into the big machine anyway. It seems like you said, when I see a machine's causing wave, it seems like there's an upper roller thing, and the belts, they don't even realize they're loose. They're diving into the floor, then slipping, then coming back into the wood and slipping. That's different. It's a lengthy wave, but when they put everything really snug and tight, it's bouncing off the floor. It's chattering. It actually leaves a chatter. There's a difference between when you see wave and you see chatter.
Correct. Chatter usually is caused by vibration, and waves are caused mechanically, like wheels being out around, drum head being out around, things like that. Chatter is real close together. Waves are far apart. And, it's hard because when people say, oh, my machine's leaving whatever they're saying, and I'm like trying to quiz them is it chatter or is it waves? And they're like, I don't know. So I try to explain it to them. It helps me to know which one it's doing,
I've seen waves from people running off a generator, and you're like, well,
oh, yeah,
you're running off a generator. It oscillates and cycles down, and it cycles up, and the machine's,
waves. I mean, so what I do too is, if I fix a machine and it runs fine here, and then a guy takes it out on a job and he's having problems with it, I'll charge him to go out to his job site. and sometimes going out and teaching him how to sand, even though he's been sanding for 15 years, the pace at which you walk, there's guys are messing around with their cord and things like that, and that will cause waves too, or they're cutting, the machine from the left to the right, and
Yep.
things like that. It's like, but I've been doing it this way for 20 years. Yeah, well, you've been doing it wrong for 20 years.
Yeah, I had one with resonance frequency. The guy was paying money to have his Hummel repaired, and Hummel always gets the bad rap. I used to think Hummel was a tricky machine. It's just that what they're not cleaning the upper roller assembly, and they're not using the right voltage, and they're not tightening everything up. Then it's a very precision machine. It's susceptible to things like that. But we had a guy, and he brought his Hummel in, and I said, there's nothing wrong with that. We went back to the house. I go, they just remodeled this house, okay? It's nothing but steel I-beam construction with no lolly columns. This is a whole new technology. I go, you can't feel this house is hopping like sitting on a bridge in traffic? And he said, no. I go, it's resonating with this floor. He put a rotary sander in, not a problem whatsoever. We took that Hummel to the second floor, the old construction, not a chatter, not a wave,
problem.
not a nothing, right?
Yeah. I get a lot of guys will call me and say, oh, my machine was leaving waves today. I said, well, take it to the next house and see if it's doing it. If it's doing it only at one house, it's not a red flag. There's so many things that can cause it other than your machine, not being proper. Loose floors, not nailed right, or on sleepers, things like that. There's a lot of, I wouldn't get alarmed, if you see it once. You see it twice, then then bring it in.
Well, your fifth part, the final part of that session, because we're still going to jump into machines, as you said, and this is super critical. Empty the vacuum. I don't care what kind of vacuum, right? Yeah. Empty the thing.
Well, again, I started to think with the big machine is, I was surprised how many one-man shows there are out there. Yeah. I always, worked for my family. I mean, we've always worked on a 2 to 3 man crew. We never would send one guy out to do a whole house. But there's a lot of guys out there that are solo, so they break their machine down, and I don't like breaking my machine down because there's so many things that can go wrong putting it together. You could put it together the one day and it runs fine. Take it to another house, put it together, and you don't do something exactly the same, and it's going to run differently. And then a couple of days later, you take it apart again, put it back together again, and now it's running, back normal. I don't like, guys who break their machines down every day. Then also, the motors roll around in the truck because they don't block them in. They're knocking the switches off the sides, breaking the fuse holders on the Hummels, things like that too.
When we're talking about vacuums, because you could have a vacuum in the dust containment. I mean, I've seen guys sand until the vacuum bag is filling up, backporting into the actual spout. And we all get it. Sometimes you forget. You can get a little bit. That's not a good thing to do, right?
I sold a guy a backpack vacuum. And he calls me up and says, this brand new vacuum, it worked for an hour and that, like an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and it just stopped working. And I said, well, bring it back to me. I'll take a look at it. But he brings it back to me, and I take the top off, and it looked like somebody filled it with great stuff. The dust was packed in there so hard. Mm-hmm. I pulled it out, and I couldn't get the bag out. I had to chisel the dust out of it. So what it was is he's doing a gymnasium floor, like, 30,000 feet or something, and the finish was wet, and he's still buffing it anyways. So it just caked inside the vacuum. Now, if he would have been smart and cleaned it out and brought it back to me, I probably would have just, replaced the motor and, not known, but I'm glad he brought it to me packed full of dust. I'm like, here's your problem. This is not you can't use it forever. You have to, when it starts making noises and you can't, that's the thing of just listening. You can tell if a vacuum is sucking and exhausting properly, it's got a certain sound. Once it's clogged or, it can't exhaust itself, you will hear a difference in the way it's running. And that's your, usually your clue to say, okay, time to empty the bag or.
You know what? You've been doing this a long time. So let me ask you this, because I know you're going to give me an answer to this. How many fires have you seen with backpacks, small vex?
So personally, 40 years of sanding, and we had one job about 7 or 8 years ago where my guys emptied the backpack vacuum into, we were doing the final coat and it was oil modified, and they emptied the backpack vacuum after buffing, and vacuuming it up
the poly dust
on top of the sawdust. and it was outside in the driveway, and within 20 minutes it was on fire, or smoldering.
Yeah.
But because I was always real strict about that too, is never put a backpack vacuum away with any dust in it. We always took the vacuum bags out, so sealing them up and leaving dust in there is what's going to cause a fire. So we were real careful about that. I got lucky in 40-year career. I never had a serious fire. I've had a couple of times where my bag, big machine bag, would start smelling weird on me, and I'd shut it down and bring it outside, and sure enough, I ran over a nail head or picked up a spark that way, and then with the air pumping into the bag and the real fine dust, it'll smolder and start a fire.
We had 7 fires once. I'm a distributor,
Wow.
so it wasn't as a floor company. It was people coming in, and every time what it was screening off polydust, mostly oil polydust, laying it on the lawn because they want to run inside and coat the floor, or worse, leaving it in the back of the van hanging right where the sun was coming in. And the next day, they would go to put it on their back. You could smell it smoldering, and the second they turn it on and the air hit it, then you had a problem.
Stain rags too.
Oh goodness, yeah, stain rags. Is it different with you must see a lot of different dust containment setups. How do you set up your dust containment system so that you can use it properly and that you keep the dust out of the house and it's not going to back up? I mean, I've seen some that have tripped breakers and it blows the dust right back through the machine. The machine pushes it right out the vacuum port.
Yeah. We were always trying different things. That's one thing, like, in the 40 years of me doing floors, I still, always learning, so anytime any new equipment came out, I was always the guy. I would buy it and see if I liked it and try it. And if I didn't like it, I'd just sell it. I might lose a few $100, but I gave it a good, try myself. I didn't mind doing that. So when everybody started using these separators, like the Oneida ones, the big cyclones and that, so we bought one. And with one edger, it was fine. But you put 2 edgers on it, and the edgers themselves are blowing more air than the system can handle, than the vacuum can suck. So you're actually, like you said, we had it running, had it in the hallway, 2 guys edging. I come walking through there, and you just see this cloud of dust coming out of the thing because the edgers are pushing more volume of air, CFM, than the vacuum can keep up with. So then we're like, okay, 1 per separator. And that was the big one, the metal one. It wasn't like the cheap little, knockoff ones. And I just stopped using that. Actually, what I used for the last almost 20 years was the Cav 26 when it first came out, the big, R2, robot looking one.
R2D2 one, yeah.
Yeah, it had 3 motors on it. I just sold it for $500 to a guy. And in 20 years, I never replaced a motor and I never replaced a switch.
Yep. Because
when the red light would come on to tell you that the filter's clogged, my guys were trained to shut it off, shake the top handle, and keep going. And I liked it because it dropped into a garbage bag. So it was, very easy to change, very cheap to maintain, running, operating. But I kept bragging on him, like, man, I can't believe that I've never changed a vacuum motor or a switch. That's just, unreal. But we took care of it. Once every year, I would take it apart, take the whole head apart and clean inside the head, just for the dust that gets clogged up in there that you don't think about. But that was my favorite vacuum ever. I had a trailer, and we always had a couple-man crew, so it wasn't, my guys hated bringing it upstairs, but we did. And actually, I had 2 of them at one point. We were doing bigger houses and stuff.
Well, I remember, almost a decade ago when they were coming out with these big trailer units and everything, and I said, I wrote a magazine article. I said, hardwood flooring guys don't have $100,000 for a truck and a trailer, and there's gasoline in there, and you got to pull start it, and now I'm in New England. You can't run 200 feet of hose up into the house. You're dragging snow. And it's getting into the house. And I said, when you come up with $300 or $400, $500 vacuums that each guy can run on the job, and by the way, that had happened, the Cav 8, the Cav 12, the Cav 26, and people were able to, one guy could use it to just vacuum, one guy could use the other one to buff, 3 vacuums, $1,800 instead of one $4,000 vacuum. But at least we got dust containment involved into our industry.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we had 2 backpack vacs on the trailer. the big cab 26, and then I had the cab 12s. And the cab 12s were, dedicated for palm sanders or one edger each or the buffer, anything, when we got to planetary sanders, they all went to the big cab 26, or the big machine went to the big, cab 26.
Sure.
We had so much to discuss with Tom that we're breaking this one up into 2 episodes. Keep an eye out for part 2 coming soon. Thank you to this season's sponsor of all things wood floor, Odie's Oil, the wood floor finish that is safe and beautiful while delivering a lower cost and higher profit margin. If you liked this episode, please rate and review All Things Wood Floor, and don't forget to subscribe.